Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee today, Thursday, the 28th of October 2021. I am deemed to be the presiding person for the context of this meeting, and therefore I am asking, please, for nominations for a chair for the subcommittee. May I have a nomination, please?
Chair, I'm happy to nominate you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And may I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. So I'm duly elected as the chair and will take it from here. Moving then swiftly to housekeeping. Could I please ask you, Ms. Holyoke, if you could take us through the housekeeping? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the chair. State your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Please ensure that you unmute yourself and always turn on the video function before speaking. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. After each party has made their representation, the chair will ask each person in turn if they have any questions or comments. However, if at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand function at the top right of the screen. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holyoke. So on then to item 2, we have no apologies. We move to item 3, declarations of interest. I will ask each subcommittee member, please, in turn, if they have any declarations of interest, which are on the flow chart at item 2. Councillor Hadley, any declarations of interest, please?
No, Chair, none to.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnson, any declarations of interest?
No, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And for completeness, I have no declarations of interest either. That's Councillor Butt. So item 4, protocol for public speaking. Could you please note that a revised protocol for virtual meetings has been circulated with the agenda sheet, and you will see all the information at item 4. So we move now to the substantive, which is item 5, review of premises licence for Southbourne Sports Club. An application has been received for a review of the premises licence for the premises known as Southbourne Sports Club, 8 Dean Road, Bournemouth, BH5 2DA. This matter is brought before the Licensing Subcommittee for determination today. I'll ask now each member if they'd like to introduce themselves and also to state their role and their ward. So my name is Councillor Jude Butt. I am chair of the Licensing Committee and I am chairman of this subcommittee for the purposes of today's business. And my ward is Creekmore, Hilborn and Waterloo. Councillor Hadley.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Andy Hadley and I'm a member of the Licensing Committee and the subcommittee, and I'm a ward councillor for Poole Town.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Toby Johnson, ward member for Alderney and Bourne Valley, member of the Licensing Committee and this subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. So we now give thanks to our 2 reserves who've come in this morning to ensure that if there are any absentees, they are covered. And that's Councillor Lawrence Williams and Councillor David Kelsey. So many thanks to you both councillors for attending. You're free to remain if you so wish, but obviously you'll be very busy, I'm sure, and have other things to do in your wards. If you wish to leave, you are so free to do so. And thank you very much for standing in as reserves today. So I will now introduce our other team, our officers and our representatives here today. So Nananka Randall.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nananka Randall and I'm the licensing manager for BCP Council.
Thank you, Mrs. Randall. Sergeant Gosling.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Sergeant Gosling. I'm from the Dorset Police Drug and Alcohol Harm Reduction Team, and I'll be summing up for you today.
Thank you, Sergeant Gosling. And we have Miss Busfield.
Yes, good morning. I'm Louise Busfield, licensing officer with the Dorset Police Drug and Alcohol Harm Reduction Team.
Thank you, Miss Busfield. And Matthew Taylor. Could we switch off microphones, please? We have an echo. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Matthew Taylor from BCP Council Environmental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And Mr. Day?
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Philip Day from Lacey's Solicitors, and I'm here to represent St. Cockabay, who is the premises licence holder and the designated premises supervisor, and who should also be with us.
Thank you very much. And Can we switch off microphones, please? Please switch them off because we've got a. Thank you, Mr. Day. And Mr. Cockabay?
Yes, hello. Yeah, my name is Mr. Hussein Cockabay, the South Pond Snooker Club.
Oh, there you are. Good morning to you, Mr. Cockabay. And Mrs. Cole? You've probably got your microphone on or muted, Mrs. Cole.
She's just dropped off the call, Chair.
Oh dear. Okay, well, we'll wait for Mrs. Cole to come back in. We need our legal advisor. Obviously having some difficulties there. We'll ask our clerk to introduce herself, Mrs. Hollyoak.
Jill Hollyoak, clerk to the subcommittee. I'm just calling Linda back in.
Okay, thank you. Linda, you're back with us. Mrs. Cole. We're just doing introductions. If you can draw breath, if you wouldn't like to introduce yourself, Mrs. Cole.
I am sorry. Yes, it's Linda Cole. I'm the legal advisor for the subcommittee this morning.
Yeah, we couldn't carry on without you, Mrs. Cole, so thank you for getting back so promptly. In addition to all the parties that have introduced themselves, we do have Democratic Services officers who are providing technical support, but will not be taking any part in the meeting. So before I run through the procedure, I just need to check, especially with all the information that's given and the speakers who are present, that all persons who've given notice of their intention to speak have been identified, and that anybody who wishes to withdraw a representation or wishes not to speak says so now. Okay, so we are content that that is correct and nobody wishes to withdraw. So I'll now explain the proposed procedure and order of speaking for the hearing as follows, slightly different from our usual format. So I will take you through it and I will fill in the parties to be assistive. The licensing officer, Nananka Randall, who's kindly standing in for Mrs. Rogers, will present our report. The applicant, who is Dorset Police Sergeant Gosling, will make his application. Is it you, Sergeant Gosling, making the application, or is it Miss Busfield?
It will be Miss Busfield today.
Thank you very much. So that will be Miss Busfield, ladies and gents, not Sergeant Gosling. He will be doing the summary. There'll be questions of the applicant, who will be Miss Busfield, by all parties, and members of the subcommittee will go first. The responsible authorities will make their representations, and on this occasion it's Environmental Health, and that is Matthew Taylor. Questions to the responsible authorities of Mr. Taylor will then ensue, and members of the subcommittee will go first. And the slight change is the respondent, Mr. Day, on behalf of his client, Mr. Cockerby, Re Southbourne Sports Club, will have the opportunity to respond to the applicant, Dorset Police, who is Miss Busfield. This will be his opportunity to respond to the application made. And then there will be questions of the respondent's representative, Mr. Day, by all parties, and members of the subcommittee will go first. And then at that stage, all parties will be given an opportunity to sum up, with the party who spoke last to go first. And the order will be Mr. Day. We will also afford an opportunity for Mr. Cockerby to speak there if he so wishes. In fact, Mr. Cockerby, when Mr. Day speaks, if you so wish to speak, you can also do so. I will invite you to do so after Mr. Day has spoken on your behalf. We will then hear Mr. Taylor. We will then hear Sergeant Gosling, who is completing the summary. And then we will then hear lastly from our licensing officer, in fact, our licensing manager, Mrs. Randall. The hearing will then conclude, and the subcommittee will deliberate in private with our legal advisor, Mrs. Cole, and our clerk, Mrs. Hollyoak. Notification of the subcommittee's decision will be given within the period of 5 working days, beginning with the day or the last day on which the hearing was held, which is today, in accordance with the regulations. The notification of decision will include information about the right of appeal as appropriate. And I shall be asking at that stage for the appeal process to be explained by Mrs. Cole. All parties now asked to agree on this proposed procedure or to make representations. I hope I've been clear. It is slightly different from what we normally expect. So, Mrs. Randall, are you content?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Sergeant Gosling, are you content?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
And Miss Busfield, are you content?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, are you content?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Microphones off as soon as you can after you've spoken. Thank you. Are they all off? They are indeed. Mr. Day.
I am content, subject to one qualification, that if in summing up Sergeant Gosling raises something that hasn't been brought up before, that I'm able to respond on any such specific matter, but not to have a second bite of the cherry, as it were.
Well, I shall make a decision at the time, Mr. Day, but thank you for that request. Mr. Cockabay, are you content? Mr. Cockabay, are you with us? Have we lost your client, Mr. Day?
No, we haven't lost him. His microphone is on mute, but I think you can take it that he is content.
Okay, Mr. Cockabay, your microphone's on mute. Are you content with the order of process? Thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for that confirmation. Okay, so item 8. Finally, please may I remind all parties speaking, as there are a lot of us, not to repeat the information which they've already given in writing, but to expand on their written representations, and all questions must be asked through the chair, and there'll be no cross-examination or cross-questioning of parties. Thank you. So that said, if everybody's content, item 9, I will ask the licensing officer, Mrs. Randall, to present her report. Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you, Chair. The matter before you today is a review of a premises licence for Southbourne Sports Club at 8 Deans Road, Bournemouth. On the 14th of September, Sergeant Gosling, on behalf of Dorset Police, submitted a request to review the premises licence. The reasons listed in the review paperwork were that the premises were failing to uphold 3 of the 4 licensing objectives, namely the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, and the prevention of public nuisance. This review has received supporting representations from Environmental Health and 9 other persons. The premises licence was granted following a licensing subcommittee on the 15th of April 2021, as the application had received at that time representations from other persons.
Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
The other info, thanks.
Yes, the substantive are in the other submissions. Thank you very much for that. Members, firstly, are there any questions on point of fact with regard to the report for Mrs. Randall? Councillor Johnson?
No, Chair, not at this time.
And Councillor Hadley?
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, you're fine, thank you. Sergeant Gosling, any questions on points of fact? Or Miss Busfield, any questions on points of fact?
No, I can speak on behalf of Miss Busfield, but we've got no questions on points of fact.
That's kind of you, thank you. Mr. Taylor, any questions on points of fact?
None, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Day, and perhaps on behalf of your client, are there any questions on point of fact?
Yes, very quickly. Just to confirm.
Sorry, Mr. Day, could you put your microphone up? You're very softly spoken. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Yes, just one for clarification.
Thank you.
There have been a number of representations from members of the public or local residents. Can I just confirm that none of them have given any indication that they wish to attend this hearing or to produce further material or anything of that nature?
Yes, I can confirm that none of them have, and I would imagine that being such a difficult, sensitive subject, that would be the reason why they didn't feel confident in attending. But you're absolutely right.
I think
nobody
Gareth,
attending.
Philip, your mic needs to be off because it's causing a lot of the reverb. Sorry, you possibly didn't catch that.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Randall. Yes, if I could just remind all members, especially Mr. Day, ping your microphone off as soon as you finish speaking. I'll take a deep breath so that I don't echo, give it some chance for the microphone to go off. Just to say, yes, we can confirm that is the case, but I can only imagine that being such a sensitive, difficult issue, that the representatives felt they didn't feel that they could appear in public. So they are listening quietly, I believe, on YouTube to the meeting, but there are no other representations of people who are not turning up. But I don't think we can take an inference that gives us any weight as to whether they feel it is serious or otherwise. So we have no other reps who will be speaking today. Thank you, Mr. Day. So that said, we then move on and we ask the applicant, and that is Dorset Police. Ms. Busfield, when you're ready, if you'd like to put forward your application. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair and Committee. just to explain how we work as the Dorset Police Drug and Alcohol Harm Reduction Team, we engage and support licensees throughout all of Dorset in order to promote the 4 licensing objectives, specifically the prevention of crime and disorder, prevention of public nuisance and public safety. When I received the application from the applicant's licensing consultant, Mr. Ramsey, in February 2021, I was reassured in the initial application that the conditions offered for this sports club were appropriate for premises of this nature, given its location, which is, as you're probably aware, in the heart of a residential area. And I was further reassured as the client readily agreed during the period of mediation to 2 additional conditions that we discussed, specifically the drinking uptime and a risk assessment for functions or events should such events be held within the premises. And these further conditions were readily agreed by the applicant's licensing consultant and the applicant in order to further safeguard this residential neighbourhood from the risk of crime and disorder, public safety and public nuisance. It is our expectation that all licensees will do their utmost to meet these objectives and fulfil their duty as licensees. And they do have an accountability to uphold the objectives and meet the conditions of their premises license. If concerns in relation to licensed premises are brought to our attention, our team follows a very formalised structure in which we undertake to provide support and engagement in an effort to work cooperatively to achieve improvement. As I said, it's a collaborative approach, often with our partners attending meetings with us, in order to achieve efficient improvements and, where possible, avoid bringing concerns before the licensing subcommittee. So this application for review has been made following what may appear to be a comparatively short period of support and engagement, given that the premises license was actually only issued some 4 months ago. However, and this is really why we have brought this application for the review, over half of the conditions of the premises license have been breached, many of these repeatedly. And it's despite the support and intervention of myself, Sergeant Gosling, our partners, local neighbourhood police officers, and indeed Mr. Cockerby's own licensing consultant, and with no improvement evident each time we conducted a visit, we were left with no other option but to submit this application, which you will all have before you and which details the extent of the time and effort we have put in working in order to support the management of this premises and to try and imbue him with an understanding of his responsibilities in managing this premises under the Licensing Act 2003. So rather than detail the individual breaches and non-compliance during my introduction here, they're set out in this very comprehensive document as was submitted by Sergeant Gosling on the 14th of September. So there's no need to elaborate further on any of the specific breaches in this regard. Suffice to say, from our perspective, Mr. Cockerby has demonstrated a sustained inability or lack of desire to comply with the conditions that were agreed and offered and mediated so very recently. That's really the extent of what I'm going to say at the moment, because as I say, everything is really contained within the packs you've got before you, and I don't want to reiterate everything that you would already have seen before you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Busfield. So we now have questions of the applicant by all parties, and we'll begin with our members. So Councillor Johnson, do you have any questions, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to air something out. Obviously, the number of complaints that were received is disproportionate, perhaps, to the incidents that have taken place. And I just wonder if you could just explain to us your thinking behind that and how much weight we should give to perhaps local residents exacerbating the situation on top of what are genuine concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Ms Busfield?
I can only speak from my responsibility as a licensing officer, and I refer again to the evidence breaches that we encountered on each visit. Certainly, if we receive complaints or concerns from local neighbours, we work cooperatively with our neighbourhood policing team. But in terms of a disproportionate or significant number of complaints, we visit premises depending on the severity of the complaint and the concerns that are raised. So I'll leave the neighbours evidence for their own, that's a separate matter as far as we are concerned. That's how their lives have been impacted. But from our perspective, I'm just going to refer to my application submitted by Sergeant Gosling and the evidence breaches that have been documented therein.
Thank you, Ms Busfield. Did you want a supplementary to that, Councillor Johnson?
No, thank you. That's almost exactly what I was hoping to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could I just have some clarification on that, please, Ms Busfield? You obviously substantially rely on local intel as to what might be occurring at any premise. So you are alerted to this and would go through your process of your 4 heads of case as to how you treat any complaint. So you say that you acted in your own right, but what were you actually acting upon? Were you acting upon the evidence or the complaints that have come forward from the public? There's a little bit of a grey area there. I'd be grateful if you could clarify that.
Yes, I mean, our team will respond on the basis of community intelligence, which might prompt us to visit to corroborate any intelligence. In this particular instant, we had specific concerns and complaints, sometimes with dates and times associated with those complaints, and which made it relevant for an initial visit to be made to the premises to corroborate any of these concerns, and also an opportunity to conduct a full licensing visit and remind the licensee, Mr. Kokabay, of his responsibilities. During these initial visits, we go through the license conditions one by one, ensure a mutual understanding of these conditions, as perhaps sometimes they may be misinterpreted. So that's how our initial interaction with Mr. Kokabay and the premises began.
Yes, that's good. So it's a corroboration of complaints which have been put forward, and it allows you the opportunity to conduct a full licensing appraisal review with regard to a visit. That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Any further questions at this point, Mr. Councillor Johnson?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hadley, any questions for Ms Busfield? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a couple if I may.
Of course.
Firstly, in terms of the timeline, and I wrote it all down for detail, but just in terms of any new licence, there are visits on a monthly basis that have led you, I guess, by September to feel that you needed to bring this to our attention. Would that frequency of visits be normal, or was that because of the earlier concerns? So that's the first one, really, I suppose, is just in terms of the visits that are documented monthly. But then you mentioned in your introduction a number of other agencies working. So I assume these are just the police drug and alcohol reduction team visits. Is the frequency normal, or is it because the concerns we're raising, please?
Thank you, Ms Busfield.
There is no normal. I would just like to clarify that when we engage and work with licensed premises, we have no normal. There is no timescale that we naturally adhere to. We will respond depending on the concerns that the premises raises or any community intelligence that we receive. So some premises might hold a license and we visit them maybe just as a courtesy visit once every 5 years, perhaps, because we have no concerns about the management of the premises, or because they keep in touch with us on a regular basis and keep us informed with any issues or any concerns or how they've dealt with various matters. When it comes to a continued series of complaints and allegations and concerns raised, not just by neighbours, but by the local community, by our neighbourhood policing teams, it does enable us, as I say, to make the initial introduction, an initial visit with the licensee, go through the license, make sure that the conditions are understood. And then if we receive continued complaints or concerns, then we will revisit as our structured process enables us to do so. And as we have written to Mr. Kokabai and his licensing consultant in the past, we've given him the understanding of how our team escalates our concerns in relation to a licensed premises. And it's a very structured approach, depending on the amount of incidents and concerns and breaches that we evidence on each visit. So if there's no sustained improvement, yes, they will receive more visits, more interaction, more engagement than somewhere where there are fewer complaints.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hadley, a supplementary or another question?
Yes,
it may be, Councillor Hadley, that you can put that question to Mr. Taylor with regard to the frequency of visits on a new licence, so to check to see that everything's all right. We might get some confirmation there. A further question or a supplementary?
Okay, well, indeed, that might be one. But I suppose my other particular question was the introduction to the statement from Dorset Police raises three concerns. One around phone footage and drug taking, the second about the fire alarm, and the third about issues about the premises in its setting. And on the third one, I just wondered, in terms of, it's not quite in a cul-de-sac, but it is in a road that doesn't lead anywhere. So in terms of the disturbances, is there an association clear between this premises and the disturbance, or is it just general footfall in the area, or the fact the brew house is just down the road around the corner? Was there a link between the disturbance in the street, which could come from a number of causes, and this particular premises, please?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Busfield.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question, Councillor Hadley? I don't understand whether you're referring to a specific report or disturbance in general.
So on page 3 of your report, sorry, through the chair, on page 3 of your report, you list 3 concerns, and the third one of those is about the disturbance to the local residents. And just looking at the setting of this premises, it is in a quiet road between 2 roads, one of which is a cul-de-sac, and it's around the corner from the brew house. So I just wondered whether the disturbances in this area were associated with people attending this premises, or just the fact that people don't seem capable of respecting other people when they walk down any street. Was it associated with the premises, is my question.
Yes, I think it's a direct link with regard to the evidence that you have, Ms. Busfield, and our case this morning. Thank you, Councillor Hadley.
Say all the on our submission, the document that you have received on our application, all of the concerns that we have identified, we have corroborated as being directly attributable to Southbourne Sports Club. We are aware that there were other licensed premises at the end of the road, but as I say, we have corroborated this evidence, and we are satisfied that the premises which we are speaking is responsible for the disturbances to which we refer.
Thank you. Councillor Hadley, a further question or supplementary?
Thank you,
You're content at the moment. I'm happy to bring you back if you have further questions. I have quite a few questions, Ms. Busfield, and I'll start with the complaints that were received. How did you in fact corroborate these, and what evidence did you take? And was any evidence that was taken put forward in any of your summations with regard to today's case? Thank you.
Initially, when we received reports from local neighbours that they were being caused disturbance by potential breaches of the premises licence, on occasion, dates and times were passed through to me, to my team, and that enabled us then to attend the premises and on specific visits, speak to Mr. Hussein, refer to these specific incidences and corroborate them on his own CCTV. Hence the report that we've been able to state categorically that the breaches have been evidenced either by Mr. Hussein's admissions during the conversations we've had with him, or corroborated when we have visited and seen his CCTV and conducted other licensing checks.
Right, so to take that down in a nutshell, the corroboration is based on the admission by Mr. Cockerby or CCTV evidence, which obviously the panel haven't seen, but which you have seen and satisfied yourself that certain breaches that are alleged have taken place. Am I right in that?
You're absolutely right in that. And if I can just elaborate on that, every visit that we conduct in company with Mr. Hussein, Mr. Kukabe, we document these at the time of our visit. Sometimes it's a one-page document that we handwrite, sometimes it's a four-page document that we handwrite. At the end of each visit, we go through what we have written down. We allow the licensee, in this instance, obviously Mr. Kokabai, to review what we have written, and he will sign the document at the end of it.
Okay, so that's clearly evidenced on Mr. Cockerby's admission on that occasion. Thank you. Mr. Day has said that he believes there's no direct evidence, but what are your thoughts on this? Do you believe that there is direct evidence and that you provided it directly, accurately, and that the evidence that you put is true?
I can only speak about our application for the review of this premises licenses, and the breaches which we have identified are accurate. And yes, I can verify the fact that they are accurate and evidenced by our visits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Day also states that he's concerned that the police are merely relying on complaints from residents. Could you again take us through your process, please? Because this is not, in fact, a substantive indicator of potential breaches. I'd be grateful if you would take us through that again. Thank you.
We appreciate that the neighbours have probably a much more extensive catalogue of complaints than we have submitted. All of the evidence that we have submitted is based on visits that either Sergeant Gosling or I have made to the premises and which have been evidenced at the time of our visits to those premises.
Thank you, that is helpful. And just for confirmation, have you seen the CCTV footage available, which was available from the complainants, or is it only the CCTV that you viewed from the premise?
No, I can advise that I have seen some of the CCTV that has been captured by the residents, but I'm not referring to that in my application.
Do you feel it might have been useful to have had this as evidence if it did point towards alleged breaches?
I believe that's something that the neighbours could have taken into consideration, and it's their decision as to how they have submitted their representations. It's not for us. We are relying.
You haven't deemed it necessary to ask for that specific evidence.
All I can reiterate is that the evidence that I'm submitting is based purely on the findings of myself and the sergeant and on our visits to the premises. We are not relying on any other evidence.
Thank you very much, Ms. Busfield. It's extremely helpful. So now I'll just go back to members. Are there any further questions, Councillor Hadley or Councillor Johnson, for Ms. Busfield? No?
Not for me.
Okay, I'm seeing you shaking your heads at this moment. Okay, thank you. Mr. Day, your opportunity for questions of Ms. Busfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I begin by asking you this? This review was submitted on the 14th of September. How many, if any, other visits have been undertaken since the review was submitted?
Thank you, Mr. Day. Ms. Busfield?
We haven't undertaken any visits since the review was submitted, Mr. Day.
You will have hopefully seen the paper that I submitted yesterday, where I have summarised the principal alleged breaches of licence conditions, which are accepted as having occurred, but we're concerned with the situation as it is today. Are you content to accept the assertions in that document regarding things like the incident book, CCTV, etc., and that those defects, breaches of licence conditions have now been rectified?
Thank you, Councillor Daysfield.
In answer to your question, Mr. Day, I believe that the time for improvement is during this periods of time between our visits, the periods of extensive engagement that we have undertaken with your client. It's not once the review has been submitted. That's a very knee-jerk reaction. So the time for improvement, unfortunately, was unsuccessful, hence this application for the review of the premises licence.
Thank you, Ms Busfield. Mr Day, further question?
Yes, I'm not in any way criticising the police for having brought the review. That is based on alleged breaches of licence conditions, which I'm suggesting to you, and it's a matter for the committee or subcommittee to decide what weight to attach to that, have now been rectified. Are you prepared to accept that those breaches have now been rectified?
I think we'll move on, Mr Day. We've received an answer, and I think we can ask the question of yourself when we get to questioning yourself with regard to your summation as to whether those breaches have been rectified or not post September the 14th, if that's helpful. Thank you, Mr Day. Any further questions?
Yes, please. In terms of the licensing objectives, crime and disorder, putting aside for one moment the fact that it is a criminal offence to breach a licence condition, are you able to point to any specific criminal offence, such as an assault, a fight, or whatever, that you are satisfied has taken place in these premises or as a direct result of the premises being licensed?
Thank you, Ms Busfield.
No, we have no record of any specific crime that has been committed in association with this premises, with the exception of the failure to uphold, to comply with the conditions of the premises licence.
Thank you, Ms
Thank you. Then the same question with regard to public safety. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand your concern there was with regard to the smoke alarm that was covered on 2 separate occasions that you witnessed. Are you able to point to any specific occasion or incident where the safety of members of public at these premises was put at risk?
Thank you, Ms Busfield.
All I can do is reiterate the fact that we haven't got any specific incidences where public safety could have been compromised, with the exception perhaps of covering smoke alarms, which has been referred to in our application. Smoke alarms are there for the protection of people within a building. So therefore, by covering such a smoke alarm, yes, could conceivably compromise public safety, the safety of anyone within their premises.
Thank you very much, Mr. Day.
And then finally, in terms of, sorry, I don't know who's got the dog. Finally, in terms of public nuisance, have you or police colleagues witnessed an incident of public nuisance? I mean, normally one would complain about loud noise from music from the premises or anything. And I appreciate this may be better directed to Matthew Taylor, but just for the sake of completion, are you able to point to any specific incident of public nuisance directly associated with these premises?
Again, I think that you hit the nail on the head there, and that does go through to my colleague in EHO to comment on that licensing objective, Mr. Day.
Then finally this, all this CCTV footage, you never asked Mr. Cockerby to download or to provide you with copies of any of it. And you also refer, or rather Sergeant Gosling, refers for the first time in his supplemental paper that was served a week ago, to mobile phone footage which clearly indicates that 3 persons inside the cubicle of one of the toilets are using drugs. That's quite a serious allegation. Why have you not provided a copy of that, or at least details as to how this footage came about, who took it, who witnessed it, where, when, what date. There's no information at all that would allow me to investigate that further. Can you help us as to why that is?
We have not used any CCTV from either the premises or any that might have been sent through to us by the neighbours. The neighbours' CCTV, if it's for their own disclosures, should they see fit. We have viewed the CCTV. We have explained what we saw on that footage, and we do not see the need to elaborate any further. And we do not believe that showing that footage would change anything at all, because we have described exactly what we have seen on that footage.
I hear what you say. It'll be a matter of a comment from me.
Sorry, Mr. Day, my microphone off because my dogs are barking. I'm just going to be 2 seconds to close the door. Please forgive me. Both of you, ouch. That's enough. Deepest apologies, deepest apologies. So, Mr. Day, on your behalf, could we just have clarification then that you have satisfied yourselves, you've actually seen this CT footage, and you've satisfied yourselves that it is in fact manifest, and that your write-up of that is an attestation to that evidence, Ms. Busfield. I think we do need firm clarification of that for Mr. Day, if that's the case.
Absolutely, I couldn't have put it more eloquently.
Okay, thank you. I hope that's helpful, Mr. Day. Any more questions, Mr. Day?
No, Chair, no more questions, but there are a number of matters that I will obviously address when it comes to be my turn.
Yes, of course, Mr. Day, and you'll have as long as you need for that, because this is quite complex, and we'd want you to have every opportunity to raise all the questions that you feel you would want to. So, does Mr. Day, does your client wish to ask any questions, or no?
I'm able to speak to him independently on the phone if need be, and there's no matters that we need to raise now. He's
Okay.
to ask the question.
Okay, Mr. Day. If that does occur, please indicate, and I'll make sure that you're able to speak. Okay, if you do get direct information from your client you'd like to share with us. Okay.
Well, I will simply raise my hand.
Okay, thank you. As you are doing now, yes. Okay. So, Mr. Taylor, do you have any questions for Sergeant Busfield, please?
No, none. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And Mrs. Randall, do you have any questions for Sergeant Busfield?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'll just pop back to members as to whether anything has come out of Mr. Day's questioning, and as to whether there are any further questions of Mrs. Busfield by members. Councillor Johnson?
No, Chair. Thank you.
And Councillor Hadley?
No, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we now move on to our responsible authorities, and who are to make their representations. And our responsible authorities is environmental health, and we'll ask Mr. Taylor to put forward his summation. Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Good morning. I wanted to come along today to provide the board with an update on my involvement with this business, and to be here to answer any questions should you have any. Firstly, I would like to confirm that many of the complaints have been correctly passed to the police regarding this business, and the police have led on this case because the matters were mostly being identified as antisocial behaviour that was taking place. Therefore, my dealings with this business have been limited. However, I've attended the visits with the police and I wanted to be present today in order to show my support for the review and answer any questions posed. My email confirms the interactions that I've had with the business, so I don't think I need to confirm anything further at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Day. And your representation is page 40, I believe, of our report. and it's written to Sarah Rogers, and that outlines in perhaps a little more detail your interest in the matter. So, members, are there any questions, please, for Mr. Taylor? Councillor Johnson?
Not at this time, no, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Hadley?
Yes, well, I guess the question is in terms of noise, and I think it was raised by Mr. Day, whether you have received complaints about particularly noise nuisance separate to the ASB ones, please.
Yes, it's in the written document. It was that it wasn't noise caused by music or something, but it was mainly perhaps the noise of the more than four people being externally making a bit of a noise when they were chatting in the evenings. I think that was what we were talking about, Councillor Hadley. Are there any further questions, Councillor Hadley? No, none at all. Okay, Mr. Day, do you have some questions for Mr. Taylor?
Yes, just one really.
Thank you. Thank you.
People chatting in the street, whether they're from the club or whether they're coming from the pub at the end of the road, or whether they're just passing by, smoking or otherwise, simply because they can be heard by local residents. And that falls far short of that amounting to a public nuisance. Would you agree?
Mr. Taylor?
I would, yes. People talking outside is very difficult to be able to confirm as a statutory nuisance. It can happen, especially when there are a number of people, but the numbers when it's people walking past, etc., that would not be a statutory nuisance and would not be considered as a public nuisance as per the conditions.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Just one. I'm going to ask you the same question as I asked Ms. Busfield. Are you in a position to produce any direct evidence that these premises has been the source of what you would regard as a public nuisance?
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
No, I have not received any evidence, and I have not collected any evidence personally to prove that there's this public nuisance.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Day?
Nothing else, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mrs. Randall, do you have any questions for Mr. Taylor?
No, I don't. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, thus far. Now it's we move on then to the opportunity for Mr. Day, who is the respondent for his client, Mr. Cockerby, and he has the opportunity to respond to the applicant, Ms. Busfield's submission. And of course, if Mr. Cockerby wishes to also speak and address the panel, if he so wishes, he's able to. That isn't a problem. And I'm sure that Mr. Day will advise us if he would like to or not. So, Mr. Day, your opportunity now to put forward your response to the submission. Thank you, Mr. Day.
My apologies first that this came rather late in the day, but I hope that you and your colleagues...
Indeed, you're forgiven. There was much discussion.
Let's put it like this. It took the police almost 7 weeks to produce the additional document that you will have seen, the application for review, which contained material that was not in the original application, and I'll come to that in a minute. So to be able to respond to it, I think in 6 days rather than 7 weeks, I might be forgiven, but there it is. I'm a solicitor, I'm a lawyer, but I really don't like arguing law in cases such as this, because it's normally, fairly common sense. You know how to approach it, etc. You're experienced counsellors. But in this case, it's unusual in a number of respects. And I think, particularly bearing in mind that this is being recorded and broadcast, and I understand the local residents are listening, forgive me if I underline a few legal matters. The first is, of course, that your decision in this case must be based on evidence. Now, evidence, hearsay evidence, you can take account of the written representations that have been received. and you can take account of hearsay evidence. In other words, Ms. Busfield, for example, saying, well, I've looked at this bit of video footage and I accurately report what it is. That's actually hearsay evidence, because the direct evidence is the actual footage itself. And on it goes, and on it goes. In this case, you have heard from the police who bring this review that other than breaches of licence conditions, they have no evidence of any incident of crime or disorder or public nuisance or public safety. Environmental health officer responsible for public nuisance matters has also said he has no direct evidence of any incident of public nuisance being associated with these premises. And because none of the local residents have chosen to come along to this hearing today, I'm not in a position to challenge them, to put them to proof as to the incidents to which they refer. As you will have seen from my skeleton response, this place is surrounded by private CCTV cameras. The first time I went down there, I thought, you know, am I in Fort Knox or something? Look, there's one here, there's one there. And it wasn't until Mr. Cockerbee came out and pointed out some of them to me, particularly the one diagonally across the road on the back of the takeaway. It's just incredible. And one would have thought that if an incident has occurred and you can show that this has happened, that it's related to the club, then it would be a relatively simple matter to download that CCTV, give it to the police, and give it to your licensing officers in support of this review. And they wouldn't have to come along to the hearing to do that, but we have had absolutely none of it. And I raise a very substantial question mark as to the legality of these CCTV cameras. They are recording members of the public. They're not covering the owners of those cameras' front doors, gardens, driveways, etc. They are all pointed at the front door of Southbourne Sports or Snooker Club, or up and down the road immediately outside. So you need to take great care about all of that. The burden of proof is obviously on those who make this application to prove their case. They don't have to do it to the criminal standard, but you do have to be satisfied that it's more likely than not that there have been incidents of crime and disorder, that there's been public nuisance, that public safety has been put at risk. Indeed, the relevant date is today. Now, as I'm sure you know, and it happens from time to time, the premises have a bad track record. There have been fights, there's been loud music and all the rest of it. And the appropriate authority has quite properly brought the matter before your committee, ma'am, or subcommittee, for a review of the licence. And you have, quite properly, on occasions, revoked the licence. The holder of the licence then puts in an appeal. The decision that you make doesn't take immediate effect, as you know, and if an appeal is submitted within the appeal period, then the decision does not take effect until the appeal is disposed of, and then, of course, it only takes effect if the appeal is dismissed in whole or in part. And when it comes to the appeal hearing, all parties can take into account and adduce additional evidence as to what has happened since. And there are occasions where premises have cleaned up their act between today's date, the hearing of a review application, and the appeal, which is sadly usually many, many, many months later. They've operated throughout that time. They've cleaned up their act, and what happens is that either the matter is resolved because you, as the respondent to the appeal, the licensing authority, are now satisfied that the premises have put their house in order, but the appellant runs the risks of having to pay the council's costs, because if they had sorted out their act in the first place, then the appeal would not have been necessary. Right, now what has happened in this case is that Mr. Cockerby has somewhat belatedly, I accept, got the point. And I visited him on the 1st of October, a fortnight after this appeal had been brought. And by then, the majority of the issues complained about by the police in terms of breaches of conditions had been resolved. There is no doubt about that. And I have provided you with photographs of things like the incident book and so on and so forth. The license is on display, and the Challenge 25 poster has been put somewhere more prominently, etc. The CCTV is working properly. And although, to be fair to Mr. Cockerby, he does struggle with the technology of it and trying to remember the 8-digit lowercase, uppercase symbols, passwords, and all the rest of it. Yes, and it was recording. You know, we looked at recordings back to the 1st of September and so on and so forth. And you must attach a great deal of weight to the fact that he has cleaned up his act. And you may raise an eyebrow, as I did. The police have at no time since the 14th of September been back to see whether or not there has been any improvement. And with the greatest respect to Miss Busfield, she isn't right when she says what matters is his behaviour up until the point of the appeal, of the review being brought. He should have sorted his act out by then. It is now too late. Well, with respect, that's not how the law stands, but I'm sure that you can take advice with regard to that, if indeed you need to. There is a further issue in this case, and I'm not in a position to deny, and indeed, looking at the CCTV myself, I have seen it happen on a couple of occasions that people have been in the premises beyond midnight. It's a very moot point, but the offence is providing a licensable activity other than in accordance with the licence. If you look at the Licensing Act itself and the regulations, there is no reference whatsoever in those to opening hours. That's completely different to the previous regime under the 1964 Licensing Act, where lock-ins were completely illegal. And if somebody was caught in licensed premises after the permitted hours, then that was an offence. That's not the situation under the current Act. The current Act talks about it being an offence if you provide a licensable activity otherwise than in accordance with the licence. And if people are not drinking, if there's no music, if there is no indoor sports going on, regulated entertainment for the purpose of entertaining an audience and all the rest of it, then it's not an offence. As I've suggested at the end of my submission, you could make it a specific condition here that the premises be cleared of all personnel, other than staff, obviously, because they need to clean up, tidy up, and all that sort of thing, by a specified time. And then if there were people that were still in the premises after midnight, then that would be a breach of a licence condition and so on and so forth. I also mention as matters of law, Human Rights Act and the Convention. I hate arguing human rights, but on this occasion I need to, because it is perfectly clear that a premises licence, unlike a personal licence, is a possession. It has value, it has worth. And one should only interfere with another's possessions if there is a good reason, if it is in the better interest of the state, and for this purpose you represent the state. to interfere with it in some way or another. And the second limb of this is that everybody is entitled to a fair hearing before an impartial tribunal. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the three of you will be completely impartial. You've not declared any interests or anything like that, and that's not a problem. But the issue of fairness is, and it's not something that you can really do anything about. The point about fairness is that anybody who is at trial of any sort is entitled to know the case against them. And in this case, there has been a manifest lack of disclosure of evidence. The police have not disclosed details of any of the complaints that they have received. The local residents have not backed up their allegations with evidence that they must have or could have had, because a number of them have those CCTV cameras. A number of them simply make generic assertions without being specific about anything at all. And of course, I'm not in a position to challenge any of it. This mobile phone footage, that really concerns me, because if you look at my, if you look at page 3 of my recent submission, these are 2 photographs that I took on the 1st of October in what I believe is the toilet cubicle that is referred to. And you will see that the window is in 2 parts. The lower part, which comes up, and I'm not particularly tall, but basically to my head height, is both fixed and it's frosted. The upper part, as you can see, does open. It's again frosted, but it only opens to a certain limited extent. And those 2 photographs show it at its full open extent. The bedroom window that we understand that this footage was taken from, you can see in the right-hand photograph. And how anybody could take mobile phone footage from that window to see what's going on in the cubicle in which I am standing is completely and utterly beyond me. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to say to me, Mr. Day, here's the footage. Now do you understand what's happened? Nothing, you know, and with respect, that's not fair. Mr. Cockabay cannot get a fair hearing, that's through no fault of yours, because an awful lot of this information simply hasn't been disclosed, or more to the point, it has not been corroborated. It is as simple as that. Equally, he has put right an awful lot of the things. The staff, yes, they have been trained, etc. They've done their drug awareness course. That's not simply because I came along. That had been organised by Mr. Ramsey ages ago. And he was taking matters seriously. He did commission Mr. Ramsey to write a long report, which was disclosed to the police and everything else. And Mr. Ramsey accompanied Mr. Cockabay and a local beat officer to a residents' meeting to hear their concerns and to seek to address them. It has to be said that one of the residents, and I'm not going to identify that person, was extremely aggressive at that meeting, and it, you know, effectively took it over and made all sorts of wild allegations, etc. And certainly there have been occasions where racist remarks have been made and other inappropriate comments about Mr. Cockabay and the way in which these premises operate and the customers that it attracts. Let's deal with the customers. I was there for a couple of hours on the afternoon of the 1st of October. One customer came in just about as I was leaving, and that would have been at about 4 o'clock. The premises it's not some bustling nightclub with hundreds of people packed in like sardines and so on and so forth. I must admit that I said to Mr. Cockabay, I don't understand how on earth you make a living out of this place, because the amount of customers that it has. I mean, I looked at CCTV, I picked random days, times, whatever. And yes, I didn't sit there, obviously going through a week's full of CCTV. But at no occasion did I see more than a dozen people in those premises at any one time. And it's not somewhere that is associated with crime and disorder in the way in which you would normally associate a review application with. It's not premises that is associated with public nuisance again, in the way in which you would normally expect to see on a review application brought by Mr. Taylor, for example, or one of his colleagues. So I'm not going to repeat all of the submissions that I've made. I invite you to look in particular pages 7 onwards, or 7, 8 and 9, basically, of my recent submission. And I'm going to wrap things up by making some suggestions as to what you could or should do. The starting point is that whatever you do needs to be proportionate, and the word used to be necessary, but it's now appropriate to uphold the licensing objective. In this sort of situation, what usually happens, or what can often happen, usually is probably putting it too strongly, is that the committee say, look, you've been naughty. You have not complied with all of the conditions. There are faults here. What we're going to do is we're going to give you the opportunity. You're in the last chance saloon. Those words have been used on more than one occasion at hearings that I've attended, to get your house in order. And what we're going to do is we're going to suspend your license for a month, 2 months, 3 months, so that you can get your staff through all the training. You can get your incident book and all your reports sorted out. You can do your risk assessments. You can fix the fire alarm. You can upgrade your CCTV or whatever. But you can't provide licensable activities whilst you're putting your house in order. In this case, that's already happened. He has already put his house in order. There is one minor point there that I would wish to add to the suggestions that I've made. There is currently no CCTV camera installed in what's been described as the lounge or the poker room or whatever, and I've included a photograph of it. My instructions are that that room isn't used, or very, very rarely used, and that was the room in which the smoke detector was covered. What I'm going to propose to you is that, assuming that you're minded to allow this license to continue, that you impose an additional condition that the poker room or the lounge room shall be kept locked shut unless and until a CCTV camera is added to the system to monitor that area. And that would be easily checked upon. You know, anybody can walk in at any time. Is the room locked? Yes, it is. No, it isn't. There's a camera in there now. And then it'll be it won't be able to open for any purpose unless and until the camera is installed. There are occasions where, and I always have difficulty with this because I don't think it's quite right, because licensing is an administrative function and not a punitive one. If the police or you as the licensing authority wanted to punish Mr. Cockerby for breaches of license conditions, then you can prosecute him, but there is no prosecution in this case. And financially, trust me, he has had to put his hand quite deeply in his pocket to pay my firm. And in that sense, this entire exercise has been expensive as far as he is concerned. Suspension of the licence are dealt with. Revocation, my submission, would be disproportionate and unreasonable, given what you have heard today from those who bring the review application and your officer who supports it, unable to point directly to specific incidents of public safety being jeopardised, public nuisance, crime and disorder. Disorder, incidentally, goes rather further than antisocial behaviour. That, I think, brings me pretty well to a final point. If you are minded to deal with this matter by the imposition of conditions and not do anything more drastic like reducing hours, etc., etc., it has been suggested by one of the local residents, at least, and now by the police, that you make it a condition the door supervisors be deployed from 9 o'clock each day until all persons dispersed from the vicinity of the premises. Right. If this was a nightclub that had a problem with people queuing to come in, fights as people leaving en masse or anything like that, then having a condition requiring SIA registered door supervisors would be a no-brainer. This is a small establishment. You've seen the photographs of it, they speak for themselves. You have heard directly from the police that they have no evidence specific of crime or disorder. It's a antisocial behaviour from people who may have been using the premises, or as has been pointed out by one of your number, ma'am, maybe just walking along that street from somewhere else, from the rather larger pub or anything like that. And I would respectfully submit that to impose such a condition would be disproportionate. It would not be reasonable in all of the circumstances, and it is not something that you should do. There is also the minor, well, not so minor point, is that there is a nationwide shortage of door supervisors, many of whom didn't renew their badges or whatever during the pandemic because of the cost of doing so, and funnily enough, because of the absence of work during lockdown, unless you were standing outside Waitrose or Tesco's or Sainsbury's or any other supermarket. So there it is. I don't think that there is anything I can usefully add. I'm obviously here to answer questions, as is Mr. Cockabay, who I suspect is content to leave it to me to make the submissions. If that is the case, Mr. Cockabay, can you just sort of put your thumb up? Right, fine. Then on that basis, ma'am, he doesn't want to specifically address you, but I shall hand back to you and turn my microphone off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Day, for that summation. So now we have opportunity for members to ask questions of yourself with regard to your summation. So I'll look to the members. So Councillor Hadley, are there any questions for Mr. Day?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, and Councillor Johnson, are there any questions for Mr. Day?
Yes, thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you, Councillor Johnson.
My main question is that, given the fact that it's quite clear that these breaches have happened, are you of the same mind that I am, in that if they were allowed to continue, if those breaches had continued and continued, that there would have been incidents of antisocial behaviour, and that they could easily have contributed to an incident in the future? Would you agree with me there?
Mr. Day?
Not necessarily, no. Because if you look at the nature of the alleged breaches, take, for example, that lack of staff training, and the staff still hadn't been trained. Well, the fact of the matter is that there was no incident of crime or disorder that the police point to, even whilst that was happening. Incident recording is after the event. refusals register, well, he was refusing people. He's now writing it down properly. He didn't have a refusals register before. The CCTV system, it was out by an hour. That's been fixed. He wasn't able to download stuff from more than a week previously. Yes, that's now been fixed. But even if it hadn't been fixed, would that suddenly mean customers would say, these breaches of license conditions gives us the perfect opportunity to have a riot in the premises and spill out into the street? Probably not. I mean, the point is that if you look specifically at the licensing objectives in the light of the evidence that you have heard today from the mouths of Ms. Busfield and Mr. Taylor, there is no evidence that the licensing objectives are not now being upheld.
Is that helpful, Councillor Johnson?
It is, Chair. Thank you. But I do have one. Sorry, I do have one.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Obviously, the licensing objectives are about prevention, and prevention means not waiting for something to happen. Obviously, so I just want to make sure that at no point would we consider that the fact that one hasn't happened any reflection on how serious the breaches were. I don't believe that they're any less serious because there hadn't yet been an recordable and evidenced incident. I believe that the breaches themselves are as serious whether or not an incident has occurred. Would you agree with me on that particular one?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Mr. Day?
I have no difficulty in agreeing with you that breaches of licence conditions are a serious matter always, in any circumstances. They should not have occurred. They did. There is nothing one can do about that other than to try and make sure that the defects are put right and that it doesn't happen again. And that's the position. What you have to determine as a licensing subcommittee is what steps, if any, it is appropriate for you to take today in order to promote the licensing objectives. That is the question that you must ask yourself, and that is reflected in the report.
Mr. Day, if you could just, Mr. Day, with respect, if you could just answer the question. With the deep fully aware of our remit and our responsibilities, so although a kind reminder, it's not really necessary, thank you. So if you could just stay in the question zone and continue to answer Councillor Johnson's question, I'd be appreciative. Thank you.
Sorry, I thought I had answered the question. Any breach of licence condition is serious, but they've now been rectified.
Thank you very much, Mr. Day. Councillor Johnson, any further questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mr. Day, obviously I usually go last because I'd like to try and summarise as my colleagues kindly tease out issues, and then I'm able to tease out a few more. The main crux of your summation is that there have been breaches, but those breaches now should not continue any further because the reasons for those breaches has been basically put right. Am I right in that assumption?
Yes.
Okay. So having said that, can we please go through the actual breaches in themselves, just for confirmation for the panel, so that we are assured that all those matters, breaches of condition, are no longer occurring because various actions have been put in place. For instance, the training is now completed. Sorry, I will put it as a question for purposes of the recording. The training is now completed to the level 2 award conflict management standard, etc. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, and I didn't trouble to include them, but Mr. Ramsey has sent me copies of the relevant certificates, and I have them if necessary.
Yeah, we're quite happy, Mr. Day, to take a yes or a no from you. We're quite happy if you confirm to take that on board as a fact. Thank you. The CCTV cameras are now all working as they should. There are no gaps. The timing is set correctly. And one extra thing, does Mr. Cockerby, has he undergone some training so that he actually knows how to download the information, he was having some difficulties. I think we need a clear assurance that he could actually use the equipment. Thank you.
To answer the first part, there is currently no CCTV camera, as I mentioned, in the poker or lounge room, hence my suggested condition. With regard to the second part, on the 1st of October, I asked him to demonstrate the system to me, because I wanted to check that it was recording for the requisite 31 days. And yes, he struggled with the password and so on. But yes, he got it to work and was able to show me that. And then we were able to pick other dates at random. I'm satisfied that he is perfectly capable. It's a bit of a struggle, but then I struggle sometimes to remember passwords. But yes, yes is the answer to the question.
Okay, thank you. And he didn't need to have reference to a phone line to assist him on that occasion?
Not on the second part of it. Initially, yes, but not now.
Okay, so sorry, just to be clear, so when you visited, you said you'd like to see some of the footage, and he was able to access this. If we could turn microphones off, I'm echoing. Thank you, Mr. Day. He was able to access this, but was he able to access this without redress to the helpline phone number, or did he just take a little bit longer, but he did it of himself without assistance?
The answer to that question is that he could not remember the password, partly because some of it is in capitals, some of it's numbers and all the usual thing. He had to ring to be reminded of the password, which he had not written down. Once he had written down the password, he was able to access the system unaided.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Okay, so we move on then to I've actually written down the actual point, but at 2:10, Mr. Cockabay admitted that he was not conversant with the Gambling Commission's Code of Practice, and this is in fact a breach. Is Mr. Kay now conversant with the Gambling Code of Practice, so he would understand what games were being played in the poker room? Thank you. And that's at 2:10 of the police annex to licensing conditions, which is page 5 of that. That's assisted.
The short answer to that question is I don't know. I refer to Mr. Cockabay, but
yes, please do.
As I mentioned, no poker is being played at all, and that room is not being used. Instead, it's academic.
Okay, just going back to 2.10 then, I just need clarification on this. The function room is used for low-level poker games, but you say it's no longer being used for that now. The designated premises supervisor shall be a responsible person and shall be conversant with and comply with the Gambling Commission's Code of Practice for equal chance gaming in clubs and premises with the alcohol licence. We have a report. Mr. Cockabay stated during the police visit on the 7th of September 2021 that he was unfamiliar with the game being played by the persons in the function poker room until the early hours of the morning on the 6th of September 2021. So can we ascertain then, or can we assume that Mr. Cockabay is not conversant with the Gambling Commission's Code of Practice?
I ask him to answer that question because I don't know the answer. Okay,
thank you for that. Do you want to make a note of these and then perhaps ask your client at the end, Mr. Day?
I can do.
Yes. Yes. Okay. At 2:12:1, there is a break in the CCTV, and this is obviously a clear breach. Has all CCTV functionality where it is present been resolved now?
As for myself personally checking the system and reviewing it, yes.
Okay, that's it. Yes, thank you very much. Could I ask why the smoke detector was actually covered up in the poker room? Because it may suggest that smoking could have been going on in that room, and I wondered if you could ascertain from your client as to whether smoking did in fact go on in that room, and that may have been the reason why the detector was covered up, or what other reason was there? I'd be grateful to understand that. Something you might put to him and come back to us at the end, Mr. Day, if that assists.
I don't need to, because I asked him about that when I was there.
Okay.
He showed me. I can never remember how you pronounce it precisely. Josh sticks, you know, the smelly things that burn very slowly.
Yes,
Right. Well, he'd been using those, and the smoke from that was setting off the one fire alarm in that room. So he covered that one smoke detector. There are, I can't remember how many, it's either 11 other smoke detectors in the premises. He denies that he has allowed smoking, and certainly when I flicked through CCTV, I didn't see anybody that I saw on the cameras smoking at any time. I see, Madam Chair, that Ms Busfield has her hands up, if you want.
Yes, Ms Busfield, was it a point of clarification?
Yes, Chair, it is a point of clarification. Just to advise that the smoke alarm in question is in the main snooker lounge. It's not in the adjacent separate poker room.
Okay. And okay. Thank you for that clarification, Ms Busfield. Just a matter of interest, really, Mr. Day. Is a joss stick not a fire risk? Is that something which would be normally used in a premise, and perhaps the room left with joss sticks burning? Can you comment?
He's not using them.
Okay.
I wouldn't know.
Okay. Okay, so again, you can confirm with. Sorry, Mr. Day, I'm speaking over you. Again, you can confirm with regard to the change in conduct of Mr. Cockabay that in fact joss sticks are no longer used. Is that correct, Mr. Day? It is indeed. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just for purposes of the panel understanding exactly what has been done, staff training records are now available and are legible and also comprehensible. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And has the drug awareness training been undertaken by the staff?
All training required has been undertaken, and Mr. Ramsey has confirmed that to me and sent me the certificate. Okay.
Looking back at the television sports programme that was shown by Mr. Cockabee for his clients, there it stated that at 2:18 there was indeed no risk assessment attached to that particular event. Could I have some comment on that, please?
It's absolutely right. They showed some of the Euro games and hadn't done a risk assessment, and they haven't shown anything similar since. And Mr. Cockabay is now well aware, because both Mr. Ramsey and I have drilled it into him, that if he wants to show anything for his customers as detailed in the relevant condition, that he must conduct risk assessment. And if he needs any assistance in terms of writing or undertaking that risk assessment, either or both Mr. Ramsey and I are in a position to assist him to ensure future compliance.
Thank you very much. Would you agree, Mr. Day, that all records that are kept should be legible and comprehensible?
Always.
Always.
Sadly, that's not always the case. But I have to say that in terms of these records, they're not perfect English, it's not perfect grammar, it's not as tidy as it could be. However, in their defence, over the years, I have seen a lot worse.
Okay, but you would agree then that the records that were kept are indeed, and we have a copy of the refusal register, we have a copy of the unredacted refusals register, and it really does show, would you agree, that it is very difficult to read, and also with regard to the comprehensibility of it, it is also difficult to understand. Are we to understand then that since the 14th of September, which is I believe the application date, that any refusals have indeed been entered in a legible and comprehensible way, as that is key, and it really is a requirement that the register is not just filled in, but it's filled in to be effective. and to uphold the 4 licensing objectives. Thank you, Mr. Day.
When I visited on the 1st of October, I looked at both the refusals register and the incident book. I did not take photographs of every single page. I just took some sample ones, including in particular, which is the larger picture in the unredacted version of the one that the police referred to with the comment, he's been a naughty boy, or words to that effect. I was able to read them. I mean, certainly if you see the originals rather than photographs where they're much reduced in size, they are, yes, they're legible. Yes, I understood them. I didn't have to sit there and say to him, can you please translate this into English for me? Because I've no idea what it actually says. It's not BBC English, if I can put it like that. But they are doing their best to ensure the proper records of incidents and refusals are noted, and the refusals certainly are being noted. There have been relatively few incidents.
Although, yes, that said, there was at one stage the refusals book was sort of updated. It hadn't been kept at the contemporaneous time, and it was actually updated, and that's was done since. You would agree that?
Yes, his explanation for that was that he had not been able to actually buy a book like the ones you've seen in the picture, with the covers, incident book, refusals register. So what they were doing was that they were making separate notes that were on loose bits of paper that were subsequently put into the back of the proper records. But again, that's now been rectified.
And you would agree that's actually a breach in case, because it has to be a record kept within the actual book. But they were making efforts so to do that. And as you say, you believe it has now been rectified. Could I ask how Mr. Cockabay monitors people outside the premise with regard to the smoking condition? It has to be no more than 4. And I believe at the residents' meeting that 2 was offered. He agreed that it would be 2. But that hasn't been honoured either. And it was also offered at page 8 of your submission, Mr. Day. Could you comment on that, please?
Yes, I can comment on that. In terms of the monitoring of it, the CCTV is a large, it's a big screen showing all of the different cameras, and anybody within the body of the club itself can see themselves on that, and it includes, and you should be able to see from the photograph of the CCTV, bear with me 1 second whilst I find it, that is on, sorry, trying to look at 2 documents at once.
Bottom of page 12.
Page 12. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. It's page 12, it's a large photo. There's a bit of glare on it from the pictures, but the top left-hand screen shows the external smoking area immediately to the front of the premises. Now, the problem that does occur from time to time is there may be no more than 2 people out there, but others then walking by, the local people, they know each other, they stop and chat, and that becomes a bit more difficult in order to monitor. But in terms of allowing people out, an appropriate signage to say no more than 2 people outside. At the time of my visit, there was a sign downstairs making it clear that you were not allowed to take any drink outside with you, to try and discourage people from being out there any longer than is absolutely necessary. If you think it would help to have a further condition, making signage saying no more than 2 people, then so be it. The premises, because of the size of the premises, basically there's only 2 of them. Mr. Cockabay tends to be there all the time, and he has this lady there who also now has her personal license and is waiting, as I said, for her DBS certificate so that Mr. Ramsey can apply for her. She's got her licensing qualification. As soon as her DBS comes through, Mr. Ramsey will apply and obtain her personal licence for her. But there's only the two of them, so they are reliant upon watching the CCTV and responding to that.
Okay, and that was actually a great claim was made by the representation we had. I think every representation stated that they were unhappy that very, very late at night, and where you perhaps wouldn't expect people to be passing by to have a chat, that there were more than 4 persons and that nobody was in essence in person there checking, which is a condition of the licence. The CCTV would also support that to enable to check, but the condition actually states that a person actually do that, and that wasn't happening. So what assurances would we have that if we were so disposed to condition to 2, if that were the decision of the panel at a later stage when we discuss it, what assurances could you give that in fact that would be monitored by a person and not just the CCTV, and that in fact signs would also be put up?
I can certainly give you the assertion of dealing with signage and things like that is really not a problem. It isn't. In terms of having somebody there all of the time, physically monitoring, that would be difficult to the point of impossibility.
Oh, Mr. Day, you misunderstand me. Of course, it would be impossible with such limited staff for that to happen. But from time to time, a check in body could be made. Would you not agree?
I would agree, and I'm sure Mr. Cockburn hears what you say and will make sure that happens, because the last place he wants to find himself is back before you again.
Indeed. I wondered whether we could ask a direct question to Mr. Cockerby as to how can he explain, there are, on the report we received from the police, there were 55% of the conditions which were applicable had been breached. And that is a huge substantive amount of anybody's operating licence and conditions within. So could Mr. Cockerby explain why he didn't, when the police and all the agencies were working so hard with him to try and assist him to comply, rather than coming to where we are now to enforce him to comply? Why has he suddenly had a road to Damascus, so to speak? You know, we want to be assured, we want to believe that this is in fact, he in fact has capacity and ability to do this. Why has it taken the review for him to suddenly come round to being able to comply? Because it is not long since the review application, which is the 14th of September. We are what? We are 6 weeks. So it's taken Mr. Cockerby that period of time to in fact wake up to the point that, you know, he really does need to comply with the 4 licensing objectives. The police were unfortunately, and our licensing authority failed dismally, bless them, in their efforts, gargantuan efforts to try and assist Mr. Cockerby into doing that. So it would seem that from the 14th of September, he has suddenly decided that he will comply. So can he please explain why it's taken review for his compliance? Thank you.
I'm happy to hand over to him, but this is not a case where a switch was flicked on the 14th of September. A number of these matters were already in hand before the 14th of September. And as I've indicated, I was there on the 1st of October, and I'm not going to repeat myself, but by then, pretty well, you've seen the list of all the matters that have been resolved, and a number of those had been resolved before the review actually began. But no, not earlier. But if you want an assurance, well, I'm going to ask him to answer the question to see what he can say to reassure you.
Yes, we can do it at the end, Mr. Day, when you have the opportunity to, obviously, because you have a little list of things. I don't expect it to be done just now, but perhaps you could add that one on. It would be helpful. Yes, thank you. Another question, that you made reference to the residents' meeting, which took place with the beat officer. Mr. Cockerby, I believe, was there, and some residents. Were you there?
I wasn't there. It was long before I. But Mr. Ramsey was.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I think I have covered all the points that I want to at this moment in time. I'm just going to go back to the membership. Oh, hello, Councillor Hadley's cat. Councillor Hadley, do you have any further questions for Mr. Day?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the fire issue, as I understand from the plans of the building, there is just one entrance, and that is below the kitchen. And can you just confirm where the smoking area is? Is that right by the front at the entrance? Steps.
It's on the ground floor, immediately in front of the building. If you look at the photographs that are on page 5, and specifically the one on the top right-hand corner, you will see there a parked car and then yellow sign.
Well, we can't hear you, Mr. Day.
Sorry, I was looking at my other screen. If you look at page 5, top right-hand corner is the photograph of the premises as a whole. The entrance is on the right-hand side. The smoking area is that very small area that is immediately in front of the front doors, behind the pavement, next to where those yellow signs are.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Day. Councillor Hadley, any further questions?
Yes, I guess we had in the introduction from Mr. Day something around circumstantial evidence, and we have in our papers 10 people who wrote in and chose not to speak to us. But I guess it was around the change in following the submission by the police, because it does seem that the antisocial behaviour has carried on into October. And I wonder, in terms of the training that the licence holder has undertaken, and the relationships with the residents, which are clearly difficult, as you highlighted. Many of them have put up cameras in response to what they see as a difficult position and feeling under threat themselves. I don't see evidence, or I'd like to know if you feel there is evidence of a change in the way in which the company is being operated since your involvement. Actually, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Mr. Day.
You're breaking up slightly there, but I think I got the gist of it. There were 3 specific incidents that were referred to as having occurred in this last month by one of the residents in particular. Somebody who appeared to be unwell or drunk, leaning against a car, somebody else walking down the street or chatting further down the street with a lighted cigarette and dropping the lighted cigarette on the ground. And I can't remember what the third thing was. But the point that I made is, you're concerned here with public nuisance. Yes, that may be antisocial behaviour, but it's fairly low level and it doesn't come anywhere near the threshold of public nuisance. The impression that one gets in this neighbourhood with certain, but not all of the residents, is that the least thing is somebody drops a crisp packet, it gets reported, it gets added to the list or anything like that. There seems to be a super sensitivity to anything and everything that goes on. I mean, I understand the concerns, but part of the problem that I've got is that I'm not in a position to be able to say, look, things have got an awful lot worse, things have got an awful lot better, because I haven't had disclosed to me full evidence with regards to this. I have no idea, for example, whether the police have had any further complaints since the 14th of September. I suspect not, because had they had further complaints that they could substantiate an evidence, then they would have been in this document that was produced as recently as last Thursday.
So in the pack, if we go back to the original pack that we had, there was evidence on the 2nd of October of someone leaving a BMW parked across a lane that blocked a number of residents. That's not insubstantial in my view, and it suggests that there is an antagonism. Obviously, there has occurred over quite a short period. This place has only been open for less than 6 months. That it has, and I suppose it's how do we help to de-escalate that and have you any evidence that that's already started? Because I would say that incident suggests that someone was doing that on purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good point. Mr. Day?
I deal with that one specifically. The CCTV cameras that are in the premises are legal. They only cover the premises and the immediate external area, as you can see from that screenshot. Mr. Cockabay does not have cameras pointing up and down the street and that would capture anything and everything that's going on. There is that allegation. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for the person who talked about that to give us specifics. What was the registration number? Was this vehicle? Let's see the CCTV. Let's see evidence that that was anything to do associated with the licensable activities that occur at Southbourne Sports Club. This is why I have real concerns, not about you, but about the fairness of this, because the information, the evidence to corroborate and to back up these assertions simply has not been provided, and it ought to have been. So I can't comment on that. Expecting us to be able to do that, I'm afraid, with the greatest respect, is asking a bit much of us.
Okay, so if I can draw your attention to page 56 of the agenda report, it highlights the registration number of a black BMW. It also suggests that the club owner was told and said that it was nothing to do with him, but the driver went into the club, and that the traffic warden that attended was jeered by a group of people. I've come at this cold, and as I said, I have no interest beyond trying to understand how we can best move forward in this. But I think there is. It's not the video, but the person who wrote in said they would be prepared to give the photo if necessary. That's what I have. That's what I can read. That suggests that it was a significant incident, and it was there for 24 hours.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Mr. Day?
I can't answer that. I have the bold assertion, etc. Plus, Mr. Cockabay, can you answer the question about this black BMW? What do you know about that, if anything? Can you turn your microphone on?
Yes, that BMW was in front of the building, and the neighbors, they come to my place. They said, "This is your customers." They looked around, and there was no anybody in my club. And I said to neighbors, I said, "I have not seen anybody." They looked around. There was no one there. Then another neighbor come up. They looked around again. I said, "Listen, I don't hardly have a customers inside. Why you blame me for every parking and every people coming parking?" And they walk away, and they say to me, "Oh, before they come to your place." I said, "But you see inside, you don't see anybody. How you see people come and walk into my club then?" They come up, the lady come up, and the man and lady come up, and they'd see nobody inside. I was outside as well. And I said, "Is nobody inside? How you gonna mention is someone go in? I'm outside myself. Is no one upstairs?" And after that, that car has been parking for 24 hours. And I said, if someone parked there, you can call the council. They give them ticket. They accepted. If they parked them, they're going to accept the tickets. And that's why they listen to me. They put tickets. They call the council, and the council come and give them the tickets. I haven't got any. I don't know anybody about this car.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions, Councillor Hadley?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank
you very much, Councillor Hadley, for teasing that out. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, just your opportunity, as we have gone through a raft of questions, a lot of information. Did you have anything further from the line of questioning or the substantive which are have been explained?
No, Chair, they've already been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Day, I did verse you with some questions for Mr. Cockabay. Did you want a few moments to put them, or are you happy to put them as we are?
May as well put them as we are. I mean, time is marching on. So if I can deal with this, if I ask the question, Mr. Cockabay, I'll turn my microphone off, you turn yours on, you answer the question, and then we'll switch it round again. Is that okay? You understand that? Yeah? Okay, right. Then the first one is about poker, right? Are people playing poker in the club, and specifically, are they using the that's been described as the poker room? That's the first question.
Yeah, there was poker room, but like a tournaments, like they can have like a tournaments for eating something or drinking something. That was like tournament. We did few games, but then after that, we haven't done it for long time. And that's why the door is always shut. And that's why the door is. And because of we always shut that door, that's why the reason I was burning those smelly things.
We'll come to the smelly things in a moment, but just to specifically ask the question, there is a condition on the licence about you being familiar with the Gambling Commission's rules about playing poker in clubs. Have you made yourself familiar, or will you make yourself familiar with those rules before allowing any poker to be played?
We not gonna play poker, but I never been gambling in that place for the poker. It's been tournament. Tournament is different. It's like £10 each person to have a tournament and for drink and eating.
So what you're saying is that basically people are playing a card game, but they are not playing a card game for money or in any way which is regulated by the Gambling Act.
It's not for gambling. I'm not gonna use it anymore because it's hardly people turning up, and that's why it's no point, you know.
Then I want to ask you about the smoke detectors and the joss sticks. Are you still using joss sticks in the premises at all?
No, I'm not using it. Even the fire extension, they come up and I say to them exactly like this. He said to me, why is this smoke detector is being closed? I said, because this room's always closed and it's like a damp, because we're not using it. It's like a damp. That's why I've been using the smoke things. And he said to me, okay then, and this is no problem. And he said to me, if the alarm guy, because I called it for checkup, alarm and smoke detectors, everything, and he turned up and he said, if you leave the door and window open, and a damp will go. That's why the reason was I was turned the smoke smelling things.
Okay. And then the last one, unless anybody else wants to ask you any questions, I think you accept that over a period of time you didn't comply with a number of the conditions on the license. What assurance can you give to the councillors here today that that's in the past, and that from this point onwards, certainly you will make sure that each and every condition on the license is properly and fully complied with? What promise can you give to the councillors, or can you give that promise?
Yes, I do give that promise, because we've been follow everything by the rules now, and we follow, because I've been doing business for 22 years in Southbourne, and I'm really old business owner in Southbourne. I've been training for 22 years in there. I know all the communities and I know all the most peoples, and for this business I'm just be new. That's why the beginning this has happened, but I've been to business for a long time in Southbourne. I promise I follow, because but beginning I didn't know for kind of this trade, but now I know.
Thank you, Mr. Cockerbay. Ma'am, back to you. If you or your colleagues have any further questions of him or me.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Day. Mr. Councillor Johnson, did you have anything further, especially with regard to Mr. Cockerbay and his need to give a firm assurance as to the fact he would uphold the 4 licensing objectives if we were so determined to continue with the licence?
No, thank you, Chair, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Hadley?
No, thank you, Chair. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions for Mr. Cockabay at this time. So now opportunity then, Mr. Day, for other parties to raise questions with regard to your submission. And I will go to Ms. Busfield. I believe you're raising questions, although of course Sergeant Gosling also open to you as well. Ms. Busfield?
No, I've got nothing further to add. Any questions will be raised by Sergeant Gosling.
Sergeant Gosling?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just have three, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
The first one is in relation to this smoke detector, which is of course a concern to us. We raised it. And these joss sticks were apparently used, albeit I could sense no sort of smell relating to joss sticks when we visited, but we'll take the word of Mr. Cockabay in that regard. But just for point of clarity, Mr. Cockabay states that the joss sticks were used in the poker room and the door kept closed, from what he just said just then. Perhaps Mr. Cockabay could explain or clarify why it was the smoke alarm in the main bar right near to the entrance exit area was indeed the one. It was in fact immediately practically below that camera that the screen that Mr. Day alluded to earlier. It was indeed that one right in the centre of the premises that was covered on two separate occasions. And perhaps Mr. Cockabay could put some context around that, please.
Thank you, Sergeant Gosling. Mr. Cockabay, please, if you could answer.
Yeah, it's the reason you don't smell because it's not all the time I'm burning it, and sometimes I'm burning it. Even fire extension, they saw I burned it, and if you do have contact with them, you can have a touch with them. Not all the time, sometimes.
Okay, and the other question, I think, which was, if you'd like to repeat your question, I think, Sergeant Gosling, you'd have more clear and quick information with regard to the geography of the room and the problem of which smoke alarm. So if you'd like to repeat your question to Mr. Cockabay, I don't think he's understood.
Okay, it's in relation to why, given the fact that the joss sticks were apparently used in a relatively sealed room in the poker room, that why it the smoke detector, which is in the main bar area, at the time of we visited during opening times, why it was in fact that one that was covered.
Thank you. Mr. Cockabay?
Is more than many smoke alarm is inside. Them two smoke alarm, poker smoke alarm, and the place we had a meeting is so close to each other. It's not even like we could say about 2 or 3 meters. That does affect the second one as well.
Sorry, I think the panel's going to need a little bit of geography here. Sergeant Gosling, you've advised us about an alarm in the main bar next to the camera that has been covered on 2 separate occasions. With regard to proximity, is it being, are we to understand, or Mr. Cockaby's asking us to take as a reason as to why this alarm was covered, is because it was in such close proximity to an alarm in a closed room that was having joss sticks burning. Is that what we are being asked to understand?
Yeah, I think that somewhat confuses the point, really. I personally would say it was about 4 or 5 yards from, if you were stood directly below that smoke detector to go towards the poker room.
So we're on a different floor, are we, Sergeant Gosling?
No, it's on the same floor.
Right.
It's essentially the poker room is a room that comes off the main bar area, and this smoke alarm was designed to function to detect smoke in the main bar area, totally separate to the poker room, which Mr. Cockabay states is always got the door closed. So I think perhaps that's somewhat.
Yes, that's I think my confusion. I'm sure the panel will also be questioning that. let's just confirm this. The poker room door has been kept shut with the joss sticks burning because of the damp smell. Since advice was given by the fire authority, the best way to get rid of damp was to open the windows and the door, and the damp would go away. But at the time that the smoke alarm was covered in the main bar area, that door to the poker room was indeed shut with joss sticks burning in it. So there, we can imagine, would not have been an opportunity for that smoke to have come out of that room and affected the bar area. But there's a clear breach that those two alarms were in fact covered. Is that right, Mr. Cockerby?
Yes, but the door is not like a smoking door. If you notice that, it's like slide door. You know, you push it like this, they open like this. It's not like proper door. You can still smoke go through them doors, not like proper doors.
Okay, yes, and there's actually, thank you very much, Mrs. Cole, for that note. There's a plan of the premises on page 34 for those of you like me who were struggling to work out where everything was. So apart from the fact that it was actually a material breach to have actually had those smoke alarms covered, you were saying the reason why you did it was because of your methodology to try and remove the damp from the poker room. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But because we're not using the poker room now, we leave the door open, both doors, because we emptied it. Just a normal table and chairs now there.
Yes, thank you for that. Sergeant Gosling, did you want a further question, supplementary on that, or would you like to go on to your next question? Thank you.
Next question, if you wouldn't mind, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
It's really, I find myself somewhat jumping to support the residents who have provided their representations in respect of this matter, and some various inferences being drawn about them not being present. The question that I have is, are we satisfied that, given the fact that 11.9 of the 182 guidance, it does state clearly that representations can be made in writing and may be amplified at the subsequent hearing, or may stand in their own right? And so the evidence provided by the neighbours, by its own standard, and it's down to the neighbours to act of their own accord to decide what they produce and indeed what they don't produce. But we are quite happy, aren't we, Mr. Day, that can stand as is?
Yes. So, the opportunity to question any representative that may choose to turn up in person is not of right. It's just in addition to any written representation that they might make. Is that agreed?
Yes, to a limited extent. It has been suggested that you may be able to draw an inference, and I think the words were that he was very sensitive and they don't want to appear in public. As I'm sure Sergeant Gosling will be able to confirm, some of the residents, one in particular, who attended the public meeting, is no shrinking violet and has not hesitated to send Mr. Cockerbay text messages and to go round to the premises and speak to him face to face on numerous occasions in a forceful manner, if I can put it like that. I know, Sergeant Gosling, that you weren't at the meeting, the public meeting that took place, but one of your local beat colleagues was, and perhaps you can confirm what I've just said.
Sergeant Gosling, are you able to help us with that? Obviously, we don't want cross-question of parties, but it might be helpful if you were able to help us with that question. Did the beat officer at any stage advise that any member of the public was particularly forceful in his manner, no shrinking violet, as Mr. Day advises us?
I didn't get any feedback to that regard from the beat officer that was in attendance. Unfortunately, I was committed elsewhere, otherwise I would have been there. I think we could all guess as to what happened there. I wasn't there, so I'm not. I don't think it's really appropriate for me to guess. There were certain things that the residents were.
No, I was asking you, Sergeant Gosling, with regard to point of fact. Had the beat officer in fact come back to you and said he told you what happened at the meeting, but he didn't say, it seems, there was one chap there who was extremely forceful and rather outspoken and a little bit near the mark. He didn't specifically state that to you with regard to his report back to you of that meeting?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, no. Thank you. That's helpful. And your third question, unless you wanted a supplementary to your second?
No, I don't think there's need to go on supplementary on for that one. So the third question, Chair, is rather building on your approach, Chair, in relation to going through the conditions. And I'd like some clarity, please, on 2.11 condition in relation to joining the local pub watch, or the town watch as it's worded in that question. Can we get perhaps an update on that from Mr. Day, please?
Yes, indeed. In fact, that was an omission on my case. Has Mr. Can we switch microphones off, please? Who's got the mic on? Thank you. Has Mr. Cockerby now joined the pub watch scheme as required? Thank you.
Can I ask Mr. Cockerby to answer that question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Where you are with the pub watch, what's happened?
Yeah, I'm in pub watch, but because sometimes even the Clive, he's organised this pub watch website, and I spoke to his manager. I couldn't get hold of him, and he said we do get sometimes disconnects. It's like we have to keep changing password. And I spoke to him. Even I can show you the message now, and he said he will go set up new account for me, and he hasn't been back to me for a couple of days.
Okay, so can we just be absolutely clear? Are you or are you not a member of pub watch?
I'm a member, but sometimes there have been disconnects. That's why he's got to add a new website for me. And they also get sometimes the manager, their manager told me sometimes they get they have to keep changing password, because I'm not really good with technology, but he will do it for me. He hasn't been back to me, but he said he's going to set up new account for me.
Okay, could I just refer back to our licensing manager, Mrs. Randall? I don't know whether you can help us here, Mrs. Randall. The requirements for pub watch, how does that actually affect, and should pub watch be in a position where the members can't access information so that they can in fact comply with their conditions, which is the premises shall actively participate in any local town watch initiative? Can you assist us, Mrs. Randall?
It's not my forte, I'm afraid. This is where I really miss my senior licensing officer.
I'm so sorry. Yes, you've
but I know that they
notice.
have regular meetings that I would expect Mr. Cockerby to be attending. And I believe the log on that he's referring to is the system that they use for putting people forward for if they're barring them. Is that correct? I know Gareth sort of nodding his head. So there are two separate things. Is we expect Mr. Cockerby to be a member of the pub watch and be an active member by going to the meetings, etc. And the login is slightly separate. That's for him to be able to actively put forward people if they are causing a problem that he would then, bar from his premises.
I understand. Okay, so another question out of there, Mr. Cockerby, how many meetings have you been with regard to the pub watch membership requirement since April, when you were successful in your license?
Only 2 times.
I beg your pardon?
Only 2 times.
So you've been to 3 meetings.
No.
Do you know how often they meet?
They do call. They do when they set up the meeting. They do call you, and you just then you're popping down to a meeting.
Okay, and you've been to 3. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Cockerby. I beg your pardon, 2. I thought I saw 3 fingers there. Thank you. Miss Busfield, do you want to come in on a point of clarification? Thank you.
Yeah, all I just wanted to say, every pub watch in the area operates slightly differently, and the pub watch to which Mr. Cockerby could have been involved operates via WhatsApp initially. We're looking at going over to a more formalized system of Scheme Link, which will require logons. But up until now, it's just been communication via WhatsApp. And to the best of my knowledge, I've never met Mr. Cockerby at any of the PubWatch meetings, which I attend on a monthly basis. And as far as I'm aware, there's a frustration amongst PubWatch that he hasn't been available on the WhatsApp network, and people who've been raised as potentially causing trouble or banned customers have then been allowed access to his premises because he's been unaware and not on the network.
Okay, that's useful because WhatsApp is very literal and very instant. You don't need passwords, etc. It is actually on your screen and available for you to take part in. Thank you for that clarification. Any further questions, Sergeant Gosling?
Yeah, just one supplementary to that one, Chair.
Yes.
The information that we have in relation to PubWatch is that Mr. Cockerby made the inquiry to join on Tuesday of this week. And my question would be, why has it taken so long, despite the fact that Mr. Cockerby has been approached on more than one occasion by ourselves, been recommended by Mr. Ramsey, and been approached by the chair of the local PubWatch to join prior to Tuesday this week?
Thank you. So just for clarification, we did hear from Mr. Cockerby that he was in fact a member. So if the inquiry was made on Tuesday, what day did he actually become a member? Was that Tuesday or yesterday? And Mr. Cockerby, if you could answer Sergeant Gosling's question first. Thank you.
I've been to Grove in meeting with the manager a couple times, but the owner, the Clive, I don't know if the sergeant they know him or no, and he said he's got to set up new account for me. That's why I've been waiting for that.
I see. Did you want to tease it out further, Sergeant Gosling?
No, I think I've made the point. The information, like I said, is that he approached Clive from the Grove to join a couple of days ago, but not prior to then. And I think we can leave it there.
I think we will indeed. I think we will. Okay, thank you very much for that, Sergeant Gosling. Mr. Taylor, any questions for Mr. Day or Mr. Cockerby?
No further questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Mrs. Randall, any further questions for Mr. Day or Mr. Cockerby?
No further questions. Thank you.
Okay, we have been in session now for just over 2 hours. We started at 15:15. So I'm going to take, if everybody's agreeable, we're going to need a short comfort break, have a cup of coffee, stretch our legs, and we will commence at 12:30. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you so much. I'll see you at 12:30. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome back to the Licensing Subcommittee hearing today, Thursday, 28th of October, and we're recommencing from our short adjournment. So we now have the opportunity for all parties to sum up, with the party who spoke last to go first. So I'm going to start with Mr. Day and Mr. Cockerby with regard to your summation. How do you want to do this, Mr. Day? Do you want to summarise in total and then Mr. Cockerby comment, or how would you like to play it? Because there are two of you.
I'll do the talking unless there's anything specific that Mr. Cockerby wants to raise.
Okay, then. So we'll hear your summation, and then I'll ask if there's anything further Mr. Cockerby would add at the end of your summation. Are you content with that?
I am, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Day. So if you'd like to begin, thank you.
I confess that I always find this very difficult because having...
Can you lean right forward because you're very faint? Thank you. Thank you.
I don't understand why. I've not had that problem before, but anyway, I confess that I always find this extremely difficult because obviously I've just spent over an hour addressing you and so on, and I don't want to repeat what has just been said. The other difficulty that I have is that I don't know at this point what the response of the police might be in terms of the solution that I propose to you, which is that you modify this license to a limited extent by putting conditions on it, as I've already indicated, requiring that the door to the poker room be kept closed and not used unless and until CCTV coverage is extended to that area, that the use of the external area by smokers be restricted to 2 persons instead of 4, and a condition making it a requirement, a condition of the license, that all members of the public, customers, be out of the premises by, and I would suggest midnight is the appropriate time. And I do that because I look strictly at the licensing objectives here, and you've heard what's been said by the only people whom you've had an opportunity to hear from with regard to the evidence in their possession relating directly to the licensing objectives. And because it is my case that, to all intents and purposes, previous breaches of license conditions have now been rectified. I honestly don't know what the situation is with regard to Pub Watch. Obviously, I've taken my client's word for it, and you've heard what he's had to say. I haven't had an opportunity to make any contact in the last 15 minutes with the organisers of the local Pub Watch scheme to ascertain what the position is precisely and when an approach was made and what problems there may be, etc. I'm not going to say anything else other than this, Madam Chair, that if Sergeant Gosling does raise further matters or make specific submissions that I've not been able to address because I don't have a crystal ball and I can't anticipate what it is that he is going to say, that you do, in accordance with your procedure, allow me to respond, but only on such very limited matters, if we agree that it's appropriate that I should do so. And your rules of procedure do, of course, permit that. You can change your procedure at any time you like. So, Ma'am, I'm going to leave it at that because otherwise I'm going to be repeating myself ad nauseum. You've heard what I've had to say once. You don't want to hear it 2, 3, 4 times.
Yes, let me give you an assurance. If there are any new points that haven't been raised up until this point, then of course I will allow you a response. That would only be fair in all circumstances. So be assured of that. Mr. Cockerby, did you want to add anything to your representative's submission?
No, if it's the really poker room is an issue for the police officers, I can happy to put one CCTV there, no problem.
Okay, so you're offering to put CCTV in the snooker room, in the poker room, I beg your pardon, let me get it right. Right, okay. Anything else to add? Mr. Cockerby?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, then moving on. Mr. Taylor, your opportunity for your summation.
I don't think I have anything further that needs to be said at this point, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Nothing further. Sergeant Gosling, did you want to do the summation individually, or are you doing it on behalf of Ms. Busfield as well?
I will do it on behalf of Dorset Police, Chair.
Of course, indeed. Thank you for that correction. So on behalf of Dorset Police, Sergeant Gosling, your summation. Many thanks.
Thank you, and hopefully to provide you with some reassurance that I don't intend to raise new information. The summary is entirely based upon the skeleton response from Mr. Day. Nothing more, nothing less.
Sorry, Sergeant Gosling, can I just leave you there? Mr. Day, could you put your video on, please? I do like to see people while we're in session. And Mr. Taylor, could you do the same, please? Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, Mum, I only did that because sometimes it affects the quality of the sound with the extent of streaming. But I'm happy to leave it on.
Well, I need the main components there, Mr. Day, with respect, and you're definitely one of them. So it's just nice to see that you're there. Thank you, Sergeant Gosling. If you'd like to start again, I do apologise for the interruption.
No problem at all. I'd just like to reassure yourself and the committee that I don't intend to raise any new information. The submission, as far as the, if you like, the summing up, is purely based upon the skeleton response from Mr. Day, which of course formed his submission to the committee this morning. So there should hopefully be nothing else that needs clarification. So I'll go through the report. I won't highlight any particular parts other than to comment loosely. But there hasn't been any improvement of this premises for some time, despite our engagement, which is all documented for you in my earlier report. And of course, the relevant date is now, but I certainly am left without the reassurance that I expected to receive that Mr. Cockerbay was on top of things, certainly with regards to certain areas such as the pub watch, etc. Now, I will also deal with the fact that there has been lots of complaints received by police, but I have tried to ensure that we remain separate to the complaints from the neighbours. It's important that the experiences suffered, if you like, by the neighbours are highlighted by them, and that's why I've left them separate for them to evidence as they see fit or not fit, and likewise to attend or not attend. That's not something that we've become involved in, and I would hope that their evidence is taken as is. And I think Councillor Butt was absolutely right that we do experience occasions when neighbours do find it very difficult to appear before a committee. It's a very formal process. I think many people will know that it is broadcast live. And I think it is very difficult, very different to do that rather than to attend a meeting with a small number of invited people, many of whom that you know because they're your neighbours. Issues of crime and disorder. I think Councillor Johnson raised a very valid point earlier in relation to prevention of crime and disorder, and the word prevention being there. And that is very important to us. It's something that we strive to achieve, and by having conditions in place and adhered to, it ensures that even when things do happen, that licensees and premises are well prepared to deal with them. And as we've evidenced, with 55% of conditions not being met, and some of those on more than one occasion, despite our engagement and encouragement to do so by ourselves and indeed Mr. Ramsey in his report. Mr. Cockerbay continues prior to the submission of the review not to adhere to those conditions. In relation to the matter with regards to the drugs in the toilet and the photographs submitted by Mr. Day, obviously we only received the report yesterday, but the images taken of the window and the obscurity or the visibility through that window. Mr. Day is absolutely right. When photographed during the day, it's very difficult to see from one to the other because of the light being very similar. At night, which is when I've seen some mobile phone footage, it's far clearer and you can make out figures. And given the fact that it was mobile phone footage, you could hear audio as well, which is what I've alluded to in my report. So whilst those photographs during the day do show that it's very obscure, it's far clearer, I assure you, when you're seeing images from dark to a light space inside the venue. In relation to the public safety concerns, I take my safety very seriously, as I do safety of the public. And I've already alluded to it earlier, but we did visit during opening hours. There were other customers present, and the coverings over the fire alarms were present then. So whilst it is, of course, the responsibility of the fire service to take forward prosecutions and other matters relating to fire, it is important for us as a responsible authority to highlight those risks, as I'm sure you'd agree. Whilst it's not my area of profession, I still feel a sense of responsibility, and I took an oath to protect the public, and that's what I intend to continue to do. So I will highlight it despite it not being our profession. Mr. Day talks about the case being unusual, and for me, really, this was a case really brought about by complaints from neighbours, and it relates to the experiences that they've had. But we've tried to stay separate at that point. But I'm not going to try and convince you as to the validity or the severity of the experience of the neighbours. I don't live in Deans Road, but I'm really grateful for the courage of the neighbours to come forward and provide the evidence that they have done, and hopefully that will be given the due weight it deserves, because it isn't easy to come forward with any type of representation, to put the time and effort, and to sometimes have to relive some of the experience that they've endured, whether that be their children waking up or sounds of disturbance outside, and they've had to relive that in order to complete their statements. We didn't visit, as has been highlighted by Mr. Day, we didn't revisit after the 7th of September because the process of the review that will continue. There is no way of stopping that once it's been submitted, and quite frankly, already the disproportionate amount of time that we've spent on this premises is far beyond the capability of my team to be able to continue. I am a very small team. It's myself, 4 licensing officers, and we cover Dorset. I think we do so well concentrating on those premises that are that need attention, and we take action where it's appropriate, this being one of them. To give you an idea of how stretched we can be, we have a separate hearing underway this morning in Dorset Council, to come from the resilience of my team. So I can assure you that we are very busy, but to be able to constantly go back and carry out checks and to really guide someone and coach them through meeting their conditions is not something that I'm able to sign up to do. It's not something that we have the capability to do, unfortunately. I'll allow you to draw your own conclusions from the alleged breaches that Mr. Day puts forward in page 7. I mean, with regards to the details in the refusals book, it was clear to me when I read any information that had been recorded that there were more than one occasion where either the names were missing of who's completed them, sometimes the dates and times were missing as to when anything had happened. And I accept that we do see, and I'm sure you'll believe us that we do see an awful lot of incident records, and they are of a different standard. Some are brilliant, some are electronic, some are handwritten, some better than others. But it is important that this isn't just purely an admin exercise. This is something that is in place so that if something does happen at a premises, we've got the confidence, police officers, we can attend that premises and be able to get there and then a detailed understanding of what indeed has happened. And it may well be that there are low level issues at this time, but like I said, this is there to prevent crime and disorder. In relation to the CCTV experience that Mr. Day had with regards to Mr. Cockerby not being able to remember the password, it very much reflected the experience that we had during one of the latter visits when Mr. Cockerby once again couldn't remember the password and needed to call the engineer. And there was the opportunity at that point for Mr. Cockerby to record the password, which hasn't changed. In fact, the password isn't very difficult, and I think I actually remember it now. We've already talked about the pub watch, and in regards to the conclusions and submissions, Mr. Day is absolutely correct in that we don't catalogue incidents of crime, but there is disorder being experienced by the neighbours, and that's what it is that they are highlighting. It's not a frustration on our point of view with regards to why we're bringing about the review. Hopefully the committee will understand that we have simply lost confidence in Mr. Cockerby's ability to operate this premises. And as far as the costs involved of the committee hearing and the cost for Mr. Day's time, we do regret any costs, and it's certainly our preference if operators can simply meet the conditions of their license and comply with those, rather than us having to take such drastic measures such as this. But unfortunately, we find ourselves here. Requiring the customers to leave by midnight as a proposed condition by Mr. Day, I would look at that one with great caution, based on the experience that we've had with Mr. Cockerby, that he explained to us that it was his friends that were drinking tea and playing a game that was unknown to him until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So that condition itself would be very difficult to enforce, because I wouldn't like any premises to have a condition where you can't, simply have friends and family, because that would become very difficult, certainly in trying to align it with a licensable activity, as I'm sure Mrs. Randall might elaborate on further. In regards to the requirement for SIA, yes, there is a national shortage of SIA. It is becoming quite challenging, but it's the challenges that we are finding is largely around the supply and demand issue with regards to financing SIA. And I know that fiscal matters are not something for this committee, but we've not experienced any premises to date that are actually struggling to get the numbers that they desire. It's more to do with the availability from their existing providers and having to switch, and sometimes, unfortunately, having to pay more. But that is just the nature of it, as it is with various industries at the moment. I do think it would be proportionate, and in relation to the suggestion of 2100s being the time, I haven't submitted that as a start time in my report. There is no pattern, there's no obvious pattern of disorder being highlighted by the neighbours, and it is very difficult for me to sit there and think that it would be proportionate to have SIA at all times or to start from a certain time. Maybe that's something for the committee to consider in line with the concerns of the neighbours. But I've certainly not suggested 9 o'clock as a time. The option to take no action, I believe would really fail the local community. As you've seen from the brave representations that they've made, this is affecting them. This really is, and we've put a lot of time and effort. We've written to Mr. Cockerby. We've left him with copies of our instructions and recommendations, and he's had the report that he commissioned from Mr. Ramsey, and still we saw these failings. I think best highlighted by the fact that it was only on Tuesday that the approach to pub watch was finally made. So they are serious matters, as Mr. Day said, in relation to the breaches of conditions. They are serious matters, and I would really leave you finally with the comment made by Councillor Johnson, which is that we do take prevention very seriously. To have conditions and have operators in which we are confident in is absolutely fundamental to ensuring that we can maintain the high standards that we expect within the licensed community. And I have nothing more to add. I've got to the end of page 9 of Mr. Day's submission, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Gosling. Mr. Day, clearly you believe there was a new point. I didn't see one. What would your question be sitting on?
It wasn't a new point, it was a point of clarification. I refer you to page 6 of the supplementary submission that Sergeant Gosling put in, where the indented paragraph.
Please, really can't turn your face and cover your face.
Sorry.
I can't hear you, Mr. Day. Sorry.
If you look at page 6 of the additional submission made by the police last week, towards the bottom of the page, it asserts in the indented paragraph, Dorset Police recommend the door supervision be made available from approximately 2100 hours each day until such time that all persons are dispersed from the vicinity of the premises. This condition should not be confined to weekend periods, as reports of ASB disorder have been received on numerous days of the week with no obvious pattern, etc. Just to clarify, because Sergeant Gosling did say a moment ago that he had 9 p.m. Or all days of the week, but that is pretty well in mine, a verbatim copy of what was submitted by the police. So I wonder if Sergeant Gosling would like us to reflect on what he's just said in the light of what's in the written submission.
Before Sergeant Gosling does that, thank you, Mr. Day, for that reference. Could I can't find the reference. Where are we? I'm sorry.
It's page 8 of the paper. There's that's the numbering on the pages.
Page 8 of the paper.
Of the police agenda supplement.
So we've got the Annex 2 license conditions. Is this what we're talking of? We've got Annex 2 license conditions, we've got prevention of crime and disorder, and we've got all the requirements of the conditions, and then we've got the comments with regard to alleged breaches. Oh, thank you, Mr. Day, that is helpful. Okay, I'm just going to find that.
It's the penultimate
page 8, the bottom.
It's page 6 or 7 on mine, but I don't quite know how that's happened.
Yes.
Application to review premises.
That's for clarity, Chair. Yes, I was looking at.
I have it. I have found it. Okay. I'm so sorry. Yes, we've got here. Condition added to the license duty. Dorset Police recommend 2100 hours. From what I understood from Sergeant Gosling, I believe he was saying that he personally wasn't stipulating that. He was asking us to consider that from the viewpoint of the neighbours and those representatives who'd been so affected. But I will ask for clarification on that point from Sergeant Gosling if that was his intention. Thank you, Mr. Day, for raising that. Sergeant Gosling?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Day, for raising that. I was looking at a different version, as you'd probably expect. We're constantly looking at the evidence available to us and building that evidence bundle as we go along. I was looking at a different version, but I do see that the version submitted did in fact reflect 2100 hours. I think on reflection, we did look at that and did conclude that it was very difficult to align it to a 2100 hours. That was a good starting point for us to consider as an option, but it soon after became quite difficult to align that condition to some of the concerns raised by the neighbours. So yes, the submission is formally that 2100 hours should be considered. Caution with that based on what the neighbours have submitted.
Okay, thank you. So just for clarification then for the panel members, although at first inference it was thought that may be the best way forward, since the information with regard to the 10 representatives has come forward, it can't always be substantiated as to 9 o'clock might be the hour. It was difficult to ascertain. I know you also had concerns which sat around the cost, although that's for Mr. Cockerby, that's not a consideration for the committee, but it is a consideration. So in fact, what you're saying is this is very much a matter for the panel, as to if they did wish to apply a condition, it was very much a matter for them, and to take an inference from the representations that we had in front of us from the neighbours. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Day, you content?
I have nothing further to add, ma'am.
Oh, indeed. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Sergeant Gosling. So, Mrs. Randall, if you would like to make any summation, I think there were a couple of things which you touched on, which we might just need, if you can go into your deep delves there with regard to confirmation of clarification of certain points. I wondered if you might be able to comment on those. I know Sergeant Gosling did ask for one point to be clarified. Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
Yeah, I haven't got anything further to add, but could you remind me of the points? I'm very sorry.
Yes, Sergeant Gosling, I think you asked Mrs. Randall to confirm a specific point with regard to licensing. Was that around pub watch?
No, it wasn't, Chair. It was in relation to conditions.
Just testing.
Oh, sorry. It was regarding conditions that wouldn't necessarily be aligned to licensable activity. So conditions around preventing anyone from going into a premises, if you like, regardless of whether there was licensable activity taking place, and some of the challenges that might exist around that or not exist around that.
Okay, is that helpful, Mrs. Randall, or has that just put you into a further dilemma?
Like panic. Well, again, like Gareth says, it is very difficult because we can only enforce licensing matters, and it's sort of proving why they're going into the premises in the first place as to whether there's a problem or breach with the license. I don't know whether Linda Cole might want to sort of step in as our legal representative on these other points.
Thank you, Mrs. Cole. Could you assist in any way? If not, understandable, because it's a moot point. But if you could assist, I'd be grateful.
Yes, well, I can, but yes, there'll be no reason why a friend wouldn't be allowed to go into the premises to have a cup of tea. There wouldn't be a problem with that, or remaining in the premises. I think the difficulty with the condition will be the condition would have to be all customers or patrons leave the premises, and yes, that can be done. The difficulty may be going forward proving that anyone that's in there is a patron.
Okay.
Or a customer. So yeah, it's something that you need to take into account when you're thinking of conditions. They've got to be enforceable. Yes. And to try and solve a problem that you think may arise.
Thank you, Mrs. Cole. That's extremely helpful. Okay, so we've come to the end of our summation. I did just want to check, because of the complexity of the matter, is everybody content, members and all our representatives, that everybody's had the opportunity to ask the questions that they wish to ask, to make the points that they wish to make, and that everybody has had that opportunity, and there's nothing else that remains that needs to be said? Because if so, please do say it, because of the complexity of the application. Councillor Hadley, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was on that last. I'm familiar with premises clubs where the area containing alcohol is secured and the rest of the club is perhaps available outside licensing hours. And I don't know whether that's something that, you know, in terms of if Mr. Kirby was to have friends around, entirely reasonable. But how should we be expecting him to secure the area that contains alcohol outside of licensable hours? Is that a reasonable thing that we should be asking?
Okay, that's a good question. Obviously one for the panel. Mrs. Cole, did you want to comment on that at the moment?
Well, as I understand the premises, it's a smallish bar area, so I'm assuming all the alcohol is just behind the bar. There wouldn't be an expectation that somebody would be going behind the bar and taking the alcohol. That I'm not convinced that that's the issue here. I think the complaint from neighbours and the police, it's just the people coming and going maybe late at night. It's not the fact they're in the premises drinking. I don't think you've heard any evidence of noise within the premises, escaping from the premises. Your concern is the people coming and going. That's the complaints that have been given by the neighbours. I don't know if Mr. Day wants to speak with his client, and if there is a condition that could be offered that nobody's allowed to be in the premises apart from staff after closing hours. So no friends, no visitors, no family. You know, once midnight comes, is everybody prepared to be out of the? I don't know that.
Thank you,
that
Mrs.
Can be something
Cole.
that can be considered.
Could I just ask, does Mr. Cockerby live above the premises? The premises is just the premises. He doesn't abide there. Is that correct?
Correct. Is that correct? Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Okay. So there would be, on the face of things, there would be little reason for that premise to be used to entertain friends beyond the licensing activity, as it's not a place of domicile, it is a place of business. And obviously the later hours of people coming and going are causing tensions in the community. It's what might be on offer from the applicant. Mr. Day, you had your hand up, so I did want to give the opportunity of everything to be said, so please go ahead.
Just 2 points, Ma'am. If you look at page 11, which is the internal photographs, you'll see there a photograph of the bar in the top right-hand corner. Unlike some licensed premises, there is no grill or screen that comes down to isolate the bar off. The entrance to the bar, if you look at that top right-hand corner, you can see it at the far end, and that is in fact from the top of the staircase. There's a door that you can't see in the photograph on the middle left-hand side, but you go out and then left in there. So yes, you can secure the bar by closing it, but not in terms of pulling grills down. The other point, to answer your question, I specifically took instructions from Mr. Cockerby before this hearing with regard to the closing of the premises, and we are happy to offer a condition that basically everybody other than staff be clear of the premises by midnight. As you rightly point out, Ma'am, it is not somewhere where he lives or anything like that. He would need to stay with, cleaning staff, whatever, to tidy up after close of business, as it were. But there's no reason why anybody else should remain in there after midnight. Be nice if he could invite his friends, but that is a small price to pay to keep his license, Ma'am.
Yes, so we take that as an offer of condition, if that could be noted, please. It doesn't really resolve the fact that even if all staff, all customers are to be clear by midnight, that does not stop Mr. Cockerby from then saying, okay, Mum, pop round at 1 o'clock. I've got to talk about birthday party next week and have a cup of tea on business premises. So are you offering that, in fact, if everybody's going to be clear by midnight, that means that nobody enters the premise until opening of the next day's business?
In short, yes. Nobody other than the holder of the license and staff employed at the premises is allowed in the premises from closing time midnight through until the opening hour of the premise, later the same morning. Yes.
Okay, we'll take that as an offer of condition. Thank you very much, Mr. Day. Was there a second point?
Not from me, but I see Sergeant Gosling has his hand up. Okay, so everybody's getting a last moment opportunity to speak because of the complexity of the case. Sergeant Gosling.
Yes, I think that's obviously albeit a slight variation. It is a slight variation of the condition that was initially offered, and I think we can't lose sight of the fact that that condition itself would be difficult to align to licensable activity, but also I think the problems experienced are not necessarily after the terminal hour of the licensable activity, so I wouldn't want that point to be lost. Thank you.
Yes, quite. Yes. Yes, because a lot of the alleged breaches have taken place during licensable activity. Indeed, when visits have been made by various responsible bodies, that's evidenced. So, as you say, Sergeant Gosling, that will not be lost. That point won't be lost, but condition will be taken as offered by the applicant. So, ladies and gents, if there's nothing further from anybody, if everybody's content, right, thank you very much. So I'll now conclude the hearing, and the subcommittee will adjourn in private with our legal advisor, Mrs. Cole, and our clerk, Mrs. Holyoke. And notification of the subcommittee's decision will be provided within the period of 5 working days, beginning with the day or the last day in which the hearing was held in accordance with the regulations. And that's today. And the notification decision will include information about the right of appeal. So I will just ask our legal advisor, Mrs. Cole, if she'll advise all parties, please, of the right of appeal. Thank you, Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, your right of appeal to whatever decision is made today. That appeal should be made to Dorset Magistrates Court and within 21 days of the formal notification of today's decision.
Thank you very much. So everyone, all attendees, thank you so much for attending. It is complex. We will now go away and deliberate in detail as to all the matters which are before us today and consider the evidence. And we won't, of course, forget the representations and the evidence given by our 10 objectors who gave information pertaining to this, but who did not attend today in person. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we will now conclude the hearing. Thank you. And if we could stop live streaming, thank you, Mr. Harrod.